Module 34.
Okay, module 34, aquaculture and sustainable forestry. So our learning goals today are explain the environmental benefits of and consequences of aquaculture and describe the methods for reducing human impacts on forest tree removal. So we've talked about how fishing and fish protein is a growing source of protein throughout the world and how it's having its consequences of reducing the fish and the wildlife, causing different problems in the ocean, but we still have more people to feed. Okay, so what are some benefits and consequences of it? And then, if you've heard anything about the environment, you know that reducing trees is not a good thing, but we keep doing it. It's good. Okay, so another method for farming to increase food output is through aquaculture. This allows for an increase in fish population for food without depleting or collapsing fisheries. The demand for fish is increasing with population, but the increase in food provided comes primarily from aquaculture. Okay, so as you can see from this graph, this is how much fish that we produce every year in million metric tons. Okay, so a million is a big number, a metric ton is a big number, right? And so we have fisheries, so that is you're just catching the fish out of the ocean or wherever you're catching it from. And then we have aquaculture. This is for projection of what it'll look like in the next 30 years. So you can see that we will kind of bottom out on our fishing from fisheries, and we will skyrocket into what we get from aquaculture, which is good. Any reasons why you think we will never just have completely aquaculture fish?
Was aquaculture
Too expensive?
So it might be too expensive. Aquaculture is like a fish farm.
Oh. I bet those fish are really bad for real. Like,
Okay.
I bet they suck.
Okay, could take a lot of space, right? So you know how big a tuna is? A tuna's huge. Okay, so there's no way you're gonna be able to raise that thing in an aquaculture farm the current way that they're set up, right? Okay, so that's not sustainably to make a lot of money. So you're always gonna have those wild caught species. That's the only place you're gonna find them.
I thought wild caught fish was better for you.
I don't know.
You know.
Yeah.
What's the difference between aquaculture and fisheries?
Yeah, they're kind of the same thing. Inland fisheries, like you're talking about Missouri Department of Conservation fisheries, like Bennett Springs, like where they raise trout and stuff. So fisheries is just where they fish. Aquaculture is like a purposeful farm with like a net and like a cage system that shows it like off the shore. Yeah. And I believe we have some images coming up.
Wait till I have wait till we get farm.
Okay.
They're bringing giants away on Earth and you start getting farm.
Yeah. Okay. So aquaculture can be done by floating nets in near coastal marine waters, coastal ponds, so brackish water, inland ponds, and totally enclosed land structures. So like you have, technically it's an aquaculture, even though they call it a fishery down at Bennett Springs, Missouri, okay, where they raise trout and put them in the Bennett Springs, where they put them in their urban fishing park around the lakes of Missouri. So you can go to, I'm sure somewhere in Gem City, I just don't know where, but in Columbia, you go to Cosmo Bethel Lake and fish for trout this time of year because they stock them with trout just for that purpose. Yeah, so Bennett Springs is pretty cool. They release trout every so often to kind of repopulate and that kind of stuff. So that's an example of what you have here, okay? So benefits of aquaculture is increased food production. No need to take extra from fisheries, so you can, if you know how many fish you're going to be able to probably get out, just like a regular farm, you don't need to go out and hunt wild cows, right? You wouldn't need to go get wild fish if you could raise enough fish to meet your production needs. Does that make sense? Okay, all right, and then above ground tanks don't allow for escapees or disease to spread. So if we had if we were raising bass in a fish tank, you wouldn't worry about the bass escaping to our local waterway, right? Yeah, you wouldn't worry about the diseases from that fish necessarily spreading to your local waterways either, because it would go through your sewage treatment plant before it got to your pond, unless you didn't treat it like that, you just took it out. Okay? Criticism of aquaculture. So you need excessive need for filtration and pumping for food and vegetation. Okay, so that requires a lot of energy and space, obviously. and then disease may proliferate and spread from wastewater, and then non-native fish may escape. Okay, and that's if you're not having like totally enclosed. So that's if you're having something like this. So if you just had nets, which that was the video we're gonna watch today. Okay, you might have some escaped fish, and so if you're raising something that's not a non-native species, you just introduce a invasive species. Thank you. Okay, to that area, and so that's a problem, right? Okay, you're raising a bunch of animals in captivity. So a CAFO, CAFO, right? So CAFOs tend to spread disease really quickly because all these animals are in tight quarters. Well, if that disease gets in here, you might wipe out your whole fish population, or it might spread, right? Okay, you're also going to notice a giant introduction of fish waste because it's all going to be concentrated in one area. Just the same thing as our factory farms, just in the ocean. And so you're going to have a lot more algae growth and things maybe that may not need to live there because there's so much waste. And so you might go through eutrophication, which we'll learn about a little bit later. Okay, so those are some of the problems with it. If you do it in a body of water as opposed to like in a sealed tank or inland pond, okay, where things can't spread out. Okay, so now we're on our second standard. So it is describe the methods used for reducing human impacts on forestry removal. So recall that clear cutting and selective cutting are the primary methods of removing trees for forestry. So clear cutting again is when you are just taking all the trees out of the forest. You don't really care what happens after that. And then selective cutting is where you're taking a handful of trees based on certain criteria. Okay, so are they rotting? What's their age? Are they going to get the most wood out of that? Okay, how does that affect the things underneath it? How does it affect habitat, et cetera, right? Okay, so restocking trees after clear cutting allows for repopulation of the forest. It allows for erosion reduction. It starts the removal of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, known as reforestation. Okay, so planting more trees obviously can take more carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere because there's more trees to do the job, right? There's a lot of carbon that we need to take out. Okay, so replanting forests called reforestation. You guys probably put that together. Sustainable forestry is a method in which managing forests produce wood while providing clean water, maximum biodiversity, and maximum carbon sequestration. So that's kind of like the area where they were doing like crop rotation or animal rotation in the pastures. So they're cutting just enough to keep it viable. And so they still want to provide the goal of clean water because the plants filter water, right? We want to have maximum biodiversity because that means that your ecosystem is probably healthy and less susceptible to be collapsed, and then you would lose those tree benefits, right? And then we're the big goal right now in our lifetime is taking carbon out of the atmosphere. So sustainable forestry, that's the main focus of it. And so those things could be achieved by logging with animals instead of fossil fuel power machines. So getting your horses in there to drag logs out. Okay. Choosing specific trees to maintain species evenness and richness. So making sure that you're not only planting Christmas trees in one area, you're planting Christmas trees and maybe apple trees, right? Provide a little bit difference that way. If a disease comes and wipes it out, you still have a good ecosystem going on there. Okay, you're avoiding habitat fragmentation, and you're minimizing use of wood in lumber, construction, and consumer products. Okay, so you're recycling more to get that paper back out. Or one thing that we kind of touched on last time we talked is reclaimed wood. So when they tear down old buildings, do it in such a way that we can reuse some of that wood product, right? So in most of your houses, you have walls that look like this, yes? Okay, so in there you have studs, okay, and houses typically will have wood studs, and we'll have them every 22 inches is usually what the code is. So for this wall, we probably have what, 10, 12, 2x4s that are probably 8 to 10 feet tall. Okay, if we can take those out correctly, we can reuse those to rebuild. There's no reason why that needs to be torn down and thrown into the dumpster. And offer it at a reduced cost, right? That way, if we were to tear down Cap City, we're still making a little bit of money on it, and not just all going to the dump, and we're protecting our forests. Okay. Next, another important focus of managing forests is managing fires. So originally the goal was to suppress fires, but this led to large quantities of dead biomass, making the forest fires worse. So what was happening is these dead plants and dead trees were depositing their biomass onto the floor. So their leaves, their branches, the dead trees, and that kind of stuff. Well, what do those things make? They make good kindling. So they make things, it's easier to burn, right? Okay, so what's happening now, and this has happened maybe in the last 10 years or so, is they're doing prescribed burns. So fires are literally set under controlled conditions, preventing the fires from being worse in the future. So every couple of years, and if you go to Rocky Mountain National Park in Colorado, you can see where they've done their prescribed burns, and they're taking out some of that dead biomass that would otherwise catch the forest on fire. That way, if the forest did catch on fire, the burn has a lot less fuel to get started, and so potentially they can put it out a lot faster. So they're starting to do that in places like California and the Redwoods and Rocky Mountain National Park and Smoky Mountains and that kind of stuff. And so it seems a little anticlimactic, or not anticlimactic, but seems a little counterintuitive. Okay, let's burn part of this forest to make sure it doesn't burn some more. But really, if you're taking care of your kindling and that kind of stuff, it makes a lot of sense, right? Okay, questions about that? Comments, concerns? This is a pretty quick module. It's only a couple pages. Good?